You're listening to Short History Shorts audio, where history speaks louder than images. The Lex Titia, passed in 43 BC, was one of the most pivotal pieces of legislation in Roman history, though to call it a law in the traditional republican sense would be misleading. It was less an act of Senate deliberation and more a formal ratification of a political reality already imposed by force. To understand its significance, we need to place it within the chaotic aftermath of Julius Caesar's assassination in March 44 BC, when Rome was a city of paranoia, shifting alliances and raw ambition. The vacuum left by Caesar's death was enormous. He had been the unchallenged ruler of Rome for just over a year, having declared himself dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. His murder by a conspiracy of senators led by men like Brutus and Cassius, who claimed to be saving the Republic, created not a restoration of senatorial authority, but a scramble for power among Caesar's lieutenants and political heirs. In the months after the Ides of March, three figures emerged as the most powerful claimants to his mantle: Mark Antony, his trusted lieutenant and master of the horse; Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, another senior general loyal to Caesar; and Gaius Octavius, Caesar's great-nephew and adopted son, who would soon be known to history as Augustus. Octavian's arrival on the scene was unexpected. Only 18 years old at the time of Caesar's death, he was in Apollonia, Illyria, completing his education and training for a campaign against the Parthians. Caesar's will, however, named him as his primary heir, granting him not just immense wealth but the potent symbolic capital of being Caesar's son in the eyes of the Roman populace. Against the advice of his family, Octavian sailed to Italy to claim his inheritance, skillfully positioning himself as both the avenger and the political successor of the slain dictator. Antony initially dismissed him as a boy who could be manipulated, but Octavian's shrewdness quickly became apparent. He courted Caesar's veterans, paying them from his inherited fortune, and aligned himself with popular sentiment against the conspirators. Antony, for his part, had seized control of Caesar's papers and funds, using his position as consul to dominate politics in 44 BC. Lepidus commanded troops stationed near Rome and also acted as a stabilizing force for Caesar's loyalists, but the assassins of Caesar, especially Brutus and Cassius, had retreated to the eastern provinces, gathering armies for what was clearly going to be a military showdown. In early 43 BC, the situation reached a breaking point. The Senate, under the influence of Cicero, who saw Octavian as a useful counterweight to Antony, declared Antony an enemy of the state after he refused to relinquish his siege of Decimus Brutus at Mutina. Octavian, leading his own forces, fought alongside the senatorial consuls Hirtius and Pansa to relieve the siege. Both consuls died in battle, leaving Octavian in sole command of their armies. At this moment, the young heir revealed his political instinct. Instead of bowing to the Senate, he marched on Rome, forcing his election as consul in August 43 BC. With the legitimacy of the consulship in hand, Octavian immediately moved to reconcile with Antony and Lepidus. The three met in late October on a small island in the river Lavinius near Bononia, modern Bologna, each bringing 5 legions as a show of force. Their meeting was a cold calculation. All three needed one another to crush Brutus and Cassius before turning on each other. Out of this alliance came the Second Triumvirate, a formal political entity unlike the informal coalition of Caesar, Pompey and Crassus a decade earlier. This new triumvirate was legalized through the passing of the Lex Titia on the 27th of November 43 BC. The law granted Antony, Lepidus and Octavian extraordinary powers for a period of 5 years, effectively suspending most republican checks and balances. It was an open admission that the Republic's institutions had failed to control the ambitions of Rome's leading men. Under the Lex Titia, the triumvirs had the authority to make laws without the approval of the Senate or the people, to appoint magistrates and to control the provinces and armies as they saw fit. They were tasked officially with restoring the state, Re Publicae Constituendi Causa. But their real mission was to eliminate their enemies and secure their dominance. The first act of the triumvirate was brutal: the proscriptions. These were official lists of individuals declared outlaws whose lives and property could be taken with impunity. The proscriptions of 43 BC were among the most infamous in Roman history, rivaling those of Sulla in their cruelty. Wealthy senators, equestrians and political rivals were targeted, not only the assassins of Caesar, but also anyone whose death would enrich the triumvirs or remove opposition. Cicero, once an ally of Octavian, found himself on Antony's list, largely as personal revenge for Cicero's speeches against him, the famous Philippics. Cicero was hunted down and executed in December 43 BC, his head and hands displayed in the Forum as a warning. The scale of the proscriptions reshaped Roman society. Thousands were killed, and the confiscated wealth funded the triumvirs' military campaigns. Brutus and Cassius, meanwhile, had consolidated control over much of the eastern provinces and raised formidable armies. The stage was now set for the decisive confrontation between the forces of the triumvirs and the so-called liberators. In 42 BC, at the twin battles of Philippi and Macedonia, Antony and Octavian's forces crushed the armies of Brutus and Cassius. Both conspirators committed suicide, and the cause of the old republic suffered a mortal blow. With the liberators gone, the triumvirs divided the Roman world among themselves. Antony took the wealthy eastern provinces, Octavian took the west, and Lepidus received Africa. Though the Lex Titia had been designed to last 5 years, its powers were renewed in 38 BC, prolonging this extraordinary arrangement. Yet from the start, the triumvirate was an unstable union. Lepidus, lacking the military clout of the other two, was soon marginalized. In 36 BC, after a failed bid to seize control of Sicily from Octavian, Lepidus was stripped of his triumviral powers and confined to the office of Pontifex Maximus, living in political exile until his death. This left Rome's political stage dominated by the rivalry between Antony and Octavian, a rivalry that would eventually lead to the famous war culminating at Actium in 31 BC. The Lex Titia thus stands as a turning point in Roman constitutional history. It did not merely bend the rules of the Republic, it openly discarded them. While earlier strongmen like Sulla and Caesar had cloaked their dominance in the language of traditional offices, the Second Triumvirate was an acknowledged junta, empowered by law to do whatever was necessary. In effect, it was the legal death certificate of the republican system. The people and the Senate had not been overpowered in secret. They had, under duress and political necessity, consented to their own political eclipse. Historians have debated whether the Lex Titia was an inevitable consequence of decades of civil strife or a tragic aberration that might have been avoided. Some argue that Rome's political system, designed for a city-state, had long been straining under the pressures of empire, with its vast territories, enormous armies and powerful generals. In this view, the triumvirate was merely the formal acknowledgement of a reality that had existed since Marius and Sulla. That force, not law, determined Rome's rulers. Others see in the Lex Titia a moment of conscious choice, when the last defenders of the Republic ceded their authority to men they knew would not restore it. Whatever the case, the law achieved its immediate goal. It gave Antony, Lepidus and Octavian the legal cover to wage war on the liberators and consolidate power. But it also set Rome firmly on the path toward monarchy. When the triumvirate finally collapsed, it was Octavian who emerged as sole ruler, rebranding himself as the first citizen while holding all the levers of imperial power. The Lex Titia, therefore, can be seen as the midwife of the Roman Empire. It was the point at which Rome stopped pretending that its ancient constitution still functioned and embraced, however reluctantly, the rule of 3 men above all law. And though it was passed in the name of restoring order, it ensured that the Republic, in any meaningful sense, would never return. It remains one of the most chilling examples in history of how a legal measure, crafted in the heat of crisis, can dismantle a political system and replace it with something entirely new, paving the way for the rise of emperors and the end